So the first interview, this is probably one of the most nerve-wracking experiences. When I was going through the process, my Facebook RPM interview, my recruiter screen was the first one that I had at all. And I was terrified. I was so nervous. I wasn't even myself. I was so nervous. But what you have to keep in mind is that this is going to be the easiest one. Really, so 90% of the time, the first interview is just going to be a recruiter screen. So it's just going to be a 15 to 30-minute phone call asking a few basic behavioral questions. Sometimes it could be a homework case, sometimes it could be a product question. But for the remainder of this interview, we're just going to assume that it's going to be that simple 15-minute phone call that you're going to get most of the time. So the recruiter screen is just going to be a basic behavioral interview. And what I want you to do for this is I want you to be very well prepared. So the questions that you should be very prepared to answer are going to be, tell me about yourself, why this company, why product management, what are your 3 strengths and weaknesses, and then be prepared for your various tell me about yourself stories. So tell me about a time when you had difficult working with a teammate, tell me a time where you led a team, tell me a time where you launched a product. One of the reasons I want you to do your 3 strengths and weaknesses ahead of time is because this is a very common question, but it can be a very difficult question to come up with an answer for on the spot. So make sure you have answers prepared for all of those questions ahead of time. Based on the timeline we've already discussed, all of your behavioral interview prep should be done by the time you do your first interview screen, recruiter screen. What the recruiter is just really looking for at this phone call is, can you speak well and can you speak confidently? Are you a qualified candidate? And do you really care about the position? It's really easy to get through these calls. If you can communicate those things and you prepare very well for your behavioral interviews ahead of time, you should have no problem getting past the first recruiter screen. So before your interview, make sure you're doing this in a quiet place. I had a friend that did one of his phone recruiter screens while in line for some burger joint that he really wanted to go to in Seattle because he just hadn't adequately prepared time. So make sure you have a quiet place before your interview that you're able to conduct it in. On top of that, this is the benefit of phone screen is they can't see what you're doing. So I highly recommend writing an outline for a bunch of pre-planned questions. So don't go overboard because then you're going to get lost going through your notes when you ask the questions, but just the simple ones, your strengths and weaknesses, your tell me about yourself answer, why that company, list all these things out ahead of time. And one of the other things you can do is look up your recruiter too. When people like you, you're going to be more likely to get to the next round. And they're more likely to like you when you have a commonality with them. So one of the things that I would do is whenever I schedule my recruiter screen, I'd look up my recruiter ahead of time, kind of see what things they enjoy, and then try to tailor myself to really be similar to them. For example, with one of my recruiters one time, she had spent 3 years working at a nonprofit. So obviously nonprofits and social impact are super important for her. And usually I don't talk about the consulting club I was involved with a lot, 180 Degrees Consulting, and they consulted for social enterprises and nonprofits. But for this particular call, I made sure I really tried to incorporate that element. That way I could kind of bond with her about the nonprofit space. And those are the kind of things you want to do and take advantage of because you have so much time to prepare ahead of time for these interviews. Lastly, in terms of preparation, make sure you practice phone interviews with your friend ahead of time. In-person interviews, video interviews, and phone calls are all slightly different. So just practice on the phone ahead of time with one of your friends for your mock interviews. That way you're just used to that setting. And the most important part is that you're just really well prepared for your behavioral interviews. You know yourself well, you have answers to all the questions, and as long as you speak confidently, articulate yourself well, and have the relevant experience that you're looking for, you'll have absolutely no problem breezing through this interview.